we could see this and out into this huge valley for a great distance, and such a trail of what looked like smoke but was sand, and that was the trail of dust that was being put up by the German army. They were in a column and advancing on Kasserine Pass. The Germans decided to try to knock us out of North Africa. Then they made an attack on us and were very successful and kicked our butts good.
Cadaf. That was none other than Harley Reynolds, who was a member of B Company 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division. This was a guy who saw a lot of fighting in World War II, from North Africa through Sicily, Omaha Beach. His unit was among like the second wave, like 20-30 minutes after HR, and then the entire rest of the war. So today, of course, we're going to be talking about him in relation, and others in relation to the Battle of Sidi Bouzid, Kasserine Pass, whatever you have to call it, that early debacle that the Americans have in 1943. I'm, of course, your host of World War II Live, John C. McManus, alongside my buddy Kevin Hymel, of course.
John, I am the Clark Kent to your Lex Luthor tonight.
I'd like to think I'm not quite that evil, but it could go in that direction, I guess. I don't know. Depends what you say, I guess. But and of course, spinning the dials, as always, is our 11-time Emmy-winning producer and chief of staff, the amazing Mark Festoso.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for that plug, John. Appreciate it. Hey, I just wanted to mention to everyone out there listening and watching, right, one of my jobs here is a real joy, and that is I get to go into the online digital oral history collection for the World War II Museum to find these opens to the show. And let me tell you, it is absolutely amazing. They interviewed so many people, and it's so well organized. Like for this one, I just typed in Kasserine Pass, and there was just a huge amount of gems to pick from. So if you're out there and you're interested in oral history, definitely avail yourself of that online resource. For me, it's a total rabbit hole. I could just spend hours there.
So. Oh, I know. You could spend weeks. I mean, it's incredible, and it's so well, like you said, Mark. Like the search engine is so well done because you can put a unit in, a topic, person's name, whatever. But even within the interviews, that's what I like about it too. It's very well organized as to where what topic they're covering, which is great for oral histories because, as all three of us know, an oral history can be so time consuming to go through.
Oh yeah.
If and you don't know what to look for where.
You were saying how you can put in units. Hey, I put in the word Patton, with my biographies and everything, and I'm finding stories like that. It makes it easy.
Yeah, I'm doing that with Ridgeway. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. So anyway, tonight we thought we'd dive into the whole Kasserine Pass debacle. Of course, that's early in the war for Reynolds and the members of the Big Red One, even though they'd done Operation Torch. They had seen some combat by February 1943, but all of a sudden here they get hit by a joint German and Italian, we tend to forget, German and Italian offensive that is designed to do what, Kevin?
Well, it's designed to kind of give a bloody nose to the Americans and say, welcome to World War II at this point. So we're talking about the Americans landed in early November 42 in Tunisia and Algeria, basically on the other side of Africa. And then Eisenhower's got to move all these troops across Africa over hundreds of miles, and it's kind of a race before the weather turns cold and kind of stymies his armies. Unfortunately, he loses that race, and that's exactly what's going to happen. And Rommel's going to take advantage of this. Now, we have done a little bit of fighting at this point, but it's really up against the Vichy French, the French that are loyal to Nazi Germany, who are not the most stout troops, are not the most loyal, they don't have the best equipment. And so the Americans are riding high off this victory, and I think this is one of the reasons Roosevelt wanted to start in North Africa. He knew how green the American troops would be, and if we're going to take a defeat, take it someplace where it's not going to be a game changer. To give a little bit more background, on the western side of North Africa, that's where you have the British fighting Rommel. The Battle of El Alamein has already occurred, and Montgomery has kind of worn down Rommel. and he's pursuing him. And a lot of people are critical that he doesn't pursue Rommel quickly, but Montgomery has seen too many times where the British have rashly gone after the Germans or Italians and fallen apart in the process, and he's not going to allow that to happen to his 8th Army. The Americans at this point only can really conjure up a corps. We don't have the strength to have a whole army in the field. But one thing that's kind of nice is the American 2nd Corps is under a guy named Lloyd Fredendall, and the commander of the British, what's called the British 1st Army, which is kind of pressing from the west while Montgomery presses from the east. Eventually, it'll answer directly to the Army Group Commander, not the Army Commander. That's going to happen under a different commander. We'll talk about him as we get through. But we're talking about Lloyd Fredendall, and this is one of kind of Marshall's boys, one of the guys that he's impressed with. You know, he's a veteran of World War I. John, what do you think of Fredendall?
Not much. He's he's a guy who showed up really well in the Army schools, the Army schools system. You know, like Command and General Staff College. You know, Fort Benning in that era, like the infantry school, Army War College, so on and so forth. Like you said, he was one of Marshall's designated boys. And he had experience in World War I. So on paper, he looked pretty good. I mean, he really was one of the people who had accelerated and been promoted through the seniority system, but merit too. And he was pretty highly thought of. But what he's going to prove vastly here is that he's just not a combat commander.
Yep, and before we even get to the battle, you know, when we're still in those landings in Algeria, you know, there's stories about him ducking and hiding in a tank and not wanting to come ashore. And, you know, a lot of these stories are very accurate. But even if they weren't, the fact that this is what all the soldiers are talking about, you're losing confidence in your command. In fact, it gets so bad, Eisenhower sends, of all people, Patton to the front to sort of get a measure of things. And what he finds is the soldiers all tell him the same thing. We haven't seen a captain, much less a general, anywhere along the front lines. And, you know, he will actually come across a British general who he accuses of being drunk, but he comes away very unimpressed. Like, the American army hasn't even really, you know, dueled with the Germans, and it's already kind of falling apart on its way to the front. And I'll just mention as a sidebar, because, John, you and I are going to talk about this a lot in the future, or maybe you'll listen while I'll talk. But Patton, while he's inspecting, comes across his son-in-law, a major named John Waters. And Waters is one of the battalion commanders with the 1st Armored Division. And he takes a picture of him out in the desert, and that's the last picture of John Waters before he is taken prisoner by the Germans. John, what are we forgetting? We've got the British pushing in from the west, the Americans and the French. And British troops pushing in from the east. And so, you know, before we get started, is there anything we want to add, anything we're missing?
No, I think what we could add is that, you know, what you mentioned, really a depth point with Fredendall, is that, you know, he seems to be taking cover, he seems jumpy, he seems nervous, he's not visible, he's behind the lines, and so what I would say is a little of that goes a long way with combat soldiers. There are already, most of them, and especially like in the Big Red One, which is already a pretty surly outfit on some levels. A little of that goes a long way in the sense of not really having all that positive view of senior officers, and so when that word gets around that Fredendall is you know, not up to snuff. I'm not going to use the C word. You know, but that's the perception. I mean, that perception comes reality, which is why, like Patton and so many others like him, sometimes take reckless chances because they know that face of command is really important to get that word around, but also to quell fear sometimes among combat soldiers who might say, "Wow, if a general's up here, I guess this isn't really that bad of a situation, and maybe I can get through it." You know, so we don't have that culture in 2 Corps just yet.
No, and you don't have like your Corps commander living out of a tent or in a trench or a foxhole near you. Fredendall's headquarters is a cave, and just in case the cave's not big enough for him, he takes an entire, is it a battalion of engineers?
Of engineers, yeah.
Yeah, and to basically blast bigger rooms into this cave for his headquarters. Now, who's our friend? Roger Cirillo has told me that the location of the cave is technically correct. It's exactly where a corps command should be behind its division commanders. But that image of a cave, again, the soldiers talking, can you believe he's in a cave while we're in these foxholes and he's way behind the lines when we're here? I mean, not only is his leadership poor, but just the examples, again, chipping away before the battle is fought. And Sun Tzu always said every battle is won or lost before it is fought.
And the fact that it's a cave, I think, is emblematic. And as Eisenhower put it, I've never seen a headquarters so preoccupied with its own self-preservation. He said,
Yep.
yeah, I'm paraphrasing. He said something like, he's exactly right. So if he thinks that, imagine a private or a sergeant, some cynical squad leader or whatever. I mean, and the resources that are absorbed in building that headquarters when it could be spent building airfields or whatever to give the air support. Because the biggest thing that Reynolds and so many others complained about is that our Air Force seemed to be non-existent, which is one of the reasons why the Germans have this advantage, the Axis, I guess should say. So they attack on February 14th. So I've always said this is Rommel's little Valentine, to the Allies.
Right.
I'm going to launch an offensive. And so it's designed to sever through the American lines, which are not held strongly enough at that point, what's called Sidi Bouzid, which is really where the worst of this happens, not the Kasserine Pass, which
Correct.
is a little farther
Yeah,
along.
this is where they break through the line.
Yeah, it's Sidi Bouzid. Yeah, so what he wants to do, ideally, is knife all the way through and get all the way to the sea, and basically cut the Allies in two and turn the situation around in Tunisia. Now, that's a big ask. He doesn't have the logistics for that. But he does have the logistics to drive a hole.
But he has been reinforced, and that was another Allied failure. When the troops start landing in North Africa, the Germans race troops by air. There's some good victories by the Allies, but they get enough troops in there to build the 15th Army. So Rommel's got to be feeling pretty good. He knows his supply line is less than ideal, but those reinforcements, I think, really kind of bring him up to snuff. And I've seen pictures of Sidi Bouzid, and it's a wreck. You see destroyed American tanks everywhere. So he breaks through the line there, and then just keeps driving. And what he does. It's kind of like a tree root. He keeps splitting and splitting, and throwing the Americans off because they're trying to figure out where to defend. We've talked a lot about Fredendall. He's up against two American divisions, the 1st Armored and the 1st Infantry. And, the 1st Armored guy's name just escaped me. Ward. General Ward, who is not that swashbuckling, slashing armor commander that the American press and the Army have been kind of promoting, like, look, we've got this strong arm and we can do anything with it. The American 1st Infantry Division is a little different, though. That's under a guy named Terry Allen, and he is that kind of swashbuckling adventurer. At least that's the image, and one reporter even said even his name swaggers. And, he's sleeping on the floors and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's just, absolutely an earthy soldier. He's a lead from the front guy. He's colorful. He doesn't care about spit and polish at all. He doesn't give a rat's you-know-what about his own promotion to Corps Command or something like that. He cares about soldiers. He cares about fighting. So I think there's a really good leadership infrastructure in the division between him and Ted Roosevelt Jr., of course.
Yep.
His ADC, Assistant Division Commander. He's got good regimental commanders. What they don't have at this point is good intel because, through Ultra, the Allies think the attack could be coming farther to the north. They're wrong. And then he doesn't have necessarily good anti-tank capability. And that's where we pay the price. Poor anti-tank guns, and obviously our armor isn't up to snuff, and so that's why we take this punch, which really is just that. It's this punch that, in which they drive a bulge. It's like a mini Battle of the Bulge in the sense where they drive a bulge, and then the Allies react and counterattack and push them back.
And John, you were talking about anti-tank weapons. When you think about an anti-tank gun, you think of a tank that has no ceiling to it. Those the M9? The
M7 Priest?
Tank destroyers. The tank destroyers. Now, we didn't have those in the desert. A tank destroyer was a half-track with a 105 on it. So it's got almost no armor whatsoever. and just can be, knocked out with one hit, if not machine gun fire. And that, unfortunately, with our logistics at the time, that will be our main anti-tank weapon through North Africa, even, to El Qatar, and we'll get to that later. But one anecdote from this German attack, two anecdotes I'll give. One with the first, and most of the attack does hit first armored. And this is how ill-prepared they are for it. There's a story Martin Blumenson tells about these guys, and they're so proud of their light tank that they've got, and that they're just going to run over the Germans with it. And when the Germans attack, they open fire on a German tank, and to their horror, they realize they don't have live ammunition. They have paint rounds from when they've been training. So splatting paint on the side of a German, medium tank, a Mark IV or something like that. And the ultimate humiliation, the Germans, instead of knocking the light tank out, they actually do roll over it. And I think that's a perfect summation of American strength at this point and German strength. The other anecdote, I interviewed someone from Patton's staff. He actually was in charge of Patton's staff cars and the tanks that Patton would run around on that didn't have live cannons. They were wooden. But Hugh Gaffney, Patton's chief of staff, kind of takes this guy under his wing, and they drive out to Kasserine. Like we were mentioning, Sidi Bouzid is where they break through, and Kasserine is kind of where they make where the punch ends. Mm-hmm. And he says there were all these cliffs, and we drove to the base of the cliff, and there were nothing but American dead bodies. And as they said, the Germans just drove them into this sack, and they didn't even give them a chance to surrender, and just pummeled them. And what a lesson, a brutal lesson for the American army. And, when they told me this, I had never heard anything like it. And I think the lid went on pretty tight on the press to not let how big a disaster this was get out.
Yeah, and much less, 2,500 POWs, in which Major Waters was one of them, Patton's son-in-law. Yep. And, just a debacle in that first 7-8 days. So what Rommel hopes to do is, of course, get to the sea. And by that, I mean the Mediterranean Sea, to basically curve what would be northwest and to drive a division between the Allies and turn the situation around North Africa. And, of course, it's kind of impressive they've even been able to reinforce them, because let's think about the wider context. Battle of Stalingrad is going on, and that's absorbing a lot of the airlift capacity the Germans have. And yet they're able to, they and the Italians are able to reinforce, in spite of Malta still being in play in a major way too. It's really amazing. But what I've always thought, Rommel has enough strength to really hit that sucker punch. He doesn't really have enough strength to keep the opponent down on the mat, to completely finish us off. And that's sometimes a theme in this war. So Eisenhower's able to kind of scrape together enough to counterattack, like you said at El Qatar and wherever else.
That'll come later. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll come later. But so you've really within the first 6 or 7 days, we've already started to kind of turn it around. And they started to lose some momentum, mainly because
I would call it more we were staunching the bleeding, I think might be a better term.
But that was turning it around in a way, because it's because they're not advancing the way they were. And
I think it's a combination of the Germans outstretching themselves, which Rommel had a big habit of doing, but usually achieved the victory just as he's running out of gas. Whereas this one, he ran out of the gas before he makes that, crosses the finish line. And John, you had mentioned air power. This is such a new technology to the American Army that, the air power was actually doing a pretty relatively good job on a tactical and strategic level, more tactical, bombing behind enemy lines and hitting strategic locations. It wasn't supporting the infantry like it's going to be able to do in Europe. And that's the big complaint from the soldiers, that if the Germans are attacking them and they call on the radio and say, okay, we need fighter cover to protect us, it took 60 to 80 minutes to get a plane over the battlefield. I mean, that's just unacceptable. But that's something that has to be learned. And unfortunately, it's going to cost lives in the process. But the greatest plans of a peacetime army really fall apart in the face of the reality of combat.
Yeah, and of course, a little of that goes a long way too. And if you and I are ground soldiers fighting it out, and we get nailed by the Luftwaffe, and we're wondering where our guys are, or we need that close air support to ward off a German armored attack or something. We're like, where's our planes? Where's our planes? Where are these guys? So this becomes a kind of a morale buster, and also another point of cynicism, I think, for a lot of the soldiers that takes a while to wear off too. At the larger strategic level, the whole campaign in North Africa probably costs us anywhere from 4 to 6 months on our concept to have the major bombing campaign against Germany, mainly the daylight hours, that the 8th Air Force and then the 15th are going to do. A lot of those resources have to go to North Africa, and people wonder, like, why? What are we doing here? Well, the Roosevelt administration was very serious about the Germany First policy, and that's a little bit against public opinion, don't you think? Like,
everybody's angry about Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, right, and so I think the majority of Americans, at least initially, are a little bit more anxious to get after the Japanese, and of course there's all the racial and cultural hatred there. So there's a kind of I mean, of course we know the country is more united than it ever had been, but there's still some partisan divisions in the country, and so if you were a big Germany firster, you tended to be a Roosevelt Democrat, and maybe even from the East Coast. If you were an Asia firster, you tended to be a pro-MacArthur Republican, the China lobby as well, and all that. So I think Roosevelt, one of the reasons he's pouring resources into this campaign is that those political bickering at home and the off-year elections in 1942, he doesn't want to end up with a Congress that's basically controlled by the Asia firsters that might impact his policies.
Yep. Well, it's funny you mentioned the elections, because Roosevelt was really pushing General Marshall to get the troops into North Africa before the November elections.
Yeah,
and he said, "Sir, it can't be done." He wasn't running on a political clock, Marshall. And then, of course, this is terrible for Roosevelt. This defeat, this lambasting the American forces get, and so, I have to put some blame at the feet of Eisenhower, because he never really went to the front either. I think very famously, the closest he got, he saw a motorcycle courier stuck in the mud, and he's like, "Wow, this is really rough." I was like, "Well, keep going to the front and see how the guys are doing." And to his credit, he's going to learn, and we're going to follow the education of Dwight D. Eisenhower. So as the tide starts to recede a bit, and Rommel is leading this attack, but it really is taken over by General von Arnim, who is the commander of the 15th Army, and tends to get overlooked because Rommel's very burned out at this point, and he's going to be sent home, and the Allies have no idea about this, and that's going to be something that works in George S. Patton's favor, is every time he screws up, George Marshall back in D.C. says, "Well, this is the only guy that took on Rommel and beat him." We have no clue that Rommel's already departed, but so I've laid some blame at Eisenhower. But to his credit, he's going to send Ernie Harmon to the front. And Ernie Harmon is tank division commander, rough and ready kind of guy, 2nd Armored Division commander. And he takes an assessment of Fredendall and is like, "Oh my God, this guy just does not have what it takes." And so Eisenhower says, "Okay, Ernie, you want the job?" And to his credit, he says, "I can't take the job of the guy I just recommended firing." And so, John, who does Eisenhower pick next? Is it a corps commander in Morocco?
It could be. I mean, I know you don't know much about him, but let me instruct you. I mean, it's a guy named
No, he goes for somebody first, doesn't he?
Well, yeah, but I'm saying eventually, of course, it's this guy named George Patton.
But he's gonna ask for Mark Clark.
Yeah.
And Mark Clark. Yeah. So you tell him about Mark Clark.
Yeah, so Mark Clark turns him down because he'd been designated for Army Command. They were standing up an army called the Fifth Army that eventually, of course, is going to go into Italy. And that would be a step down for Clark. And so Eisenhower and Clark were very close friends. And but Clark was not willing to do that solid for his buddy. He's like, "No, I'm going to stay in Army Command." So then your boy gets the assignment.
Yeah. And earlier in the war, when the British were really hurting in North Africa, Patton's in California training, with a tank training area, and he gets the call from Marshall like, hey, I need you to go to North Africa and lead divisions to help the British out. And Patton's packing his bags and everything. And in D.C., they go, you know what? We don't have the time for that. We're just going to ship him a whole bunch of tanks. And they call Patton back and said, stand down, forget it. And he's torn up going, what did I do to screw this up? And he says, from now on, if I'm offered any combat command, I am saying yes. Mm-hmm. So when the word reaches him, he's actually inspecting some 3rd Infantry Division soldiers on maneuvers because he's slated to lead the attack into Sicily for the Americans. But, the front is calling. There's an emergency. And so he flies over to Tunisia, or actually, I think it's Algeria, where Eisenhower has his headquarters, mm-hmm. and gets briefed, and actually starts crying because he's like, I'm going to kill every damn German if it's the last thing I do, and starts crying while he does it. And Marshall's aide, John, who wrote my 5 years with Eisenhower,
3 years Navy, Harry Butcher, you mean?
Yeah, Harry Butcher. He turns to Eisenhower, and he's like, are you sure about this guy? He kind of seems a little nuts. And Eisenhower famously says, George Patton hates the Germans the way the devil hates holy water. And so with that, Patton's going to come in and sort of change things up with Second Corps very famously. And we can cover that in minute detail. Lloyd Fredendall is going to be sent home basically in humiliation. And this is the tough lessons learned by the American Army. And we're going to take that information and really change how we fight on the battlefield.
Yep, different weapons, different tactics, and of course Fredendall too. In the meantime, just to sort of wrap the discussion, put a bow on it. Fredendall, in addition to being perceived as maybe not the most courageous fellow, had also demonstrated like a rudeness, a brusqueness, an obtuseness, a kind of a just not wanting to innovate, not wanting to take any advice, not wanting to visit the front, not just a really hard guy to deal with. And so he gets sent home with this face-saving training command or whatever. Yep. He's like the classic example of a high-level failed commander early in the war. Really a sad tale on some level.
Now, I'm going to regret saying this because I want people to read Patton books all the time. But, studying someone like Fredendall, I think, would be beneficial to an Army officer because it's not just the examples of good leadership. You also need to see the examples of failed leadership to know how to maybe sidestep a few potholes here and there. But he's definitely worth looking into and studying and understanding and seeing those stories about his leadership that, lead to Kasserine Pass and his determination of his career, basically, despite that face-saving job back in the States. Nobody gets promoted back to the States for good reasons,
That's right. That's right. Yeah. His leadership or lack thereof, so that's the sad part. But, of course, we have good leadership with Carl Nam and his operation, don't we? I mean, that's good leadership there.
Yes, very much so. Carl Nam is the founder and publisher of WWII History Magazine, one of our favorite sponsors. Only sponsor, but that's all going to change soon. But if you're interested in World War II and sort of the nitty gritty, the battles, the personalities, the weapons, the spies, WWII History Magazine is pretty much where it's at. And if you're interested in getting a subscription, I mean, you can get this at Barnes and Noble, at bookstores. But if you'd love a subscription, give a call to 1-800-219-1187. Or, if you want to go online, WW2, that's the Roman numeral 2s, WW2historymagazine.com, because as Carl says, history remembered is history honored. And so Carl was nice enough to sponsor us because I do think he thinks we're a pair of chumps. And John, I think we need to get stumped.
I think he's absolutely right about us being chumps.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? Before we get into Stump the Chumps, I wanted to mention something. There was a Stump the Chump question a while back where someone asked about people serving in the Pacific and then Europe. And in my research, I came across another person, General Reinhardt, the commander of the 65th Infantry Division, which is going to come in those last months of 1945 under Third Army. And he had been fighting at Guadalcanal with the U.S. Army. I believe he was an artillery officer. John, you mentioned you've heard stuff, you've read about him too?
Yeah, he was Sandy Patch's artillery officer, I think, on Guadalcanal.
Okay.
He really
and
is
John, refresh me. It's Sandy Patch, division commander, corps commander over there?
All the above. Sandy Patch starts as like a task force commander, almost like similar to Truscott in North Africa. And he becomes then what was called the Americal Division. He becomes the commander of that. And of course, as you know, they're the first Army reinforcements the Marines get, in the aftermath of the invasion of Guadalcanal. Then, obviously, this becomes a bigger command of multiple divisions by the time the battle is later toward the end of 42 and 43. So Patch became a corps commander of multiple divisions, of which Reinhardt was mainly, his main artillery mastermind. And that was a big advantage the Americans had by that point in time.
Yeah. Okay. Mark, bring the heat.
Yeah, what do we got? Let's see how we can be humiliated, right, Kevin?
Yeah.
Fredendall. They're Fredendall, right?
Can we get some Jeopardy music to go with this section?
That's a good idea. We can do that.
That's a good idea.
I'll call Ken Jennings.
All right, so you mentioned actually earlier, John, how Battle of Kasserine Pass was almost like a mini Battle of the Bulge, right? That ties in with our first question. Sean from Annandale, Virginia, wants to know, why did Operation Wacht am Rhein, also known as the Battle of the Bulge, take the American Army by surprise?
Oh, that is always the big question, isn't it?
Yep. Hey, I'm going to jump in first, John, and say it really wasn't Wacht am Rhein. That was its original title, and it was changed to, Herbstnabel, Autumn Mist, because Hitler wasn't happy with that, and he wanted something sort of reflective of the German traditions, and so he changes the name to Autumn Mist, like weeks or not even a month beforehand. Thank you, Peter Caddick Adams, and his book Snow and Steel. But
thank God your Fuhrer is like so focused on the title of the offensive. That's so important.
It really is.
He's into details. It's good to be a Fuhrer.
So. Well, we know you love him, Kevin. We know that. Yeah. So, and the other German phrase means "watch on the Rhine," which was designed to like lull the Allies to sleep. We're just watching on the Rhine, defending.
Yeah, we're all about the defense. Yep.
Yeah. So, to the question, because we always wondered, obviously to this day, because we have Ultra and it's supposed to tell us everything, and so why in the world did the Germans get the drop on us? Now, it's an enormously big question, and I can't. And I don't think Kevin either. Both of us can hope to really
I can answer it in 4 words. I'm fine. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I'll give sort of the highlights. So the intel situation was not all that advantageous by December 1944, and the reason was Ultra was not really providing the same caliber of intel because the Germans had picked up on the possibility that there had been some sort of leak or whatever. And they had really started to kind of demodernize a lot of their communications to direct messengers and phone lines and things like that we couldn't really intercept.
Landlines, not radios for this.
Right, exactly, because the radio intercept was the key to much of the whole thing. Photo recon wasn't as big a thing because of the weather, at least in the affected areas of the Ardennes. I'm not talking about theater-wide always. I am talking about the areas where they're going to attack. Part of it too is a kind of a myopia, saying these guys are defeated. They can't possibly have this capability. But even if they do, why would they do something so stupid as to come to us when they don't have many resources left and all that? But the last point I want to make is that, and I know this may be a controversial opinion, so this is part of the fun of talking about this, I suppose. Ultra, from say my point of view as a ground combat commander, is really a bit overrated in World War II in Europe, because there's very few times that a division commander, even a corps commander, much less even an army commander, gets direct, actionable intelligence that they use in order to win a ground battle. Ultra comes much more into play for the Battle of the Atlantic. There, it's like the difference maker on many levels. So,
Yeah.
so the Battle of the Bulge, I think, needs to be seen a little bit in that context. Why we don't know more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That Ultra was a tool that worked in coordination with a lot of things when things are going right, but you can't rely on it solely. It's just another tool in the toolbox. Getting back to the original question, there was this overall feeling, home for Christmas, the war's over, and contrary to the movie Patton and subsequent books since 1952, Patton did not predict the Battle of the Bulge. That was a little sleight of hand by his wife when she typed up his diaries. So I've seen the original diaries. He has no clue this is coming. And when it does come, he does not believe it's a big threat. And he holds press conferences where he's like, the Germans don't have the ability to launch an attack. This is really kind of over with. And his intel reports are coming in, and they keep saying things like, they can launch localized attacks. They can pull back while fighting. They might surrender. And these reports go all the way up to December 16th. There's these stories about, Oscar Koch figuring out they've built up troops in Trier and it's an obvious attack. But, when Patton sees this information on Trier, he goes, what does this mean? And Koch says back, I don't know. Like everybody had a sense that maybe things weren't perfect, but nobody really had any inkling that Germans were capable of this kind of attack. And remember, the American army has not really faced Tiger tanks up to this point. That was, they were mostly fighting against the British. We've seen some of them in November, but this onslaught of heavy tanks is something the Americans have never really seen before. And, I liken it very much like kind of to Pearl Harbor, where you're at that peacetime state of mind. And so you really just, you're thinking so differently from a country in a warlike state of mind. And they can't do that. They would never do this, and it's this collective belief that the war is going to be over. It could be over tomorrow. The Germans are hurting so much. Look at all our bombers going over. And, there was one incident where I think it was a radio team intercepted some radio information from the Germans. And the lieutenant's like, I'm not taking this anybody higher. This sounds crazy, telling the higher-ups that there's going to be a huge attack. It was just unfathomable, even with the small hints they were getting of, I think a woman comes through the line and makes a report, a German surrenders the night before.
Marguerite Lindenmeyer and several others. Yeah, so this is the point I wanted to make, too, that for those on the ground in the areas where the Germans are going to attack, there was a sense that an offensive was building up. Because you did have civilian reports of a lot of German military activity. Like you alluded to a woman crossing the lines. Her name was Marguerite Lindenmeyer. She was from Luxembourg. There were her and several others like her who were giving those reports. And
you her neighbor?
There were... What?
I said, what are you, her neighbor? You seem to know her very well. And she lives at the corner of, like, Schlossenberg and Strassen Street.
Yeah, the thing about it is, you'll never... I know World War II. I know you really don't know it. So, I just sort of carry you along in this whole thing. But
I'm more of a present-day guy.
No, so it was her and many others like her who were given this information, but there were also a lot of infantry patrols that were out there, and they really sensed that something was up. So, to be sure, they don't have a sense that this is going to be like the biggest German offensive in the west of the war or something, but they do know something's bubbling, and so you see this sort of up the ranks, kind of pass the buck along kind of thing, where squad leaders are worried, platoon leaders are worried, company commanders, battalion commanders, regimental, division, corps, and then up to army command at the Hodges level, and even Bradley and his 12th Army Group. And so there is this sense that something is building. And I think that's one thing that kind of gets lost in all this. The other thing, too, and this is only my opinion, that whole...
Well, then I must be wrong.
No, of course. It has no weight to it, just like yours. But it's this whole thing of, like, we're going to be home by Christmas. Let's say the war ends with Market Garden. How is still that even going to be possible? How are you going to... You're going to have to do occupation duty. Hello. I don't understand how the commanders even let that mentality fester. It
Yep.
was absolutely ridiculous from the start. But it's still, like you said, it's still sort of hovering there, the disappointment. But yeah, the whole Christmas mentality by early December makes no sense to me, and that's all these years later, I guess.
And real quick, John, do you know her name? Is she mentioned in Alamo in the Ardennes, your book on the Battle of the Bulge?
Marguerite Lindenmeyer, yes,
Yeah,
and,
okay.
and several others
I
like
figured
her.
that was the reason you knew her so well.
Yeah, she is a really interesting first-hand account, and she posed as a German, actually, when speaking to the German soldiers, and then filtered back across the U.S. lines and told the Americans what she knew. Hers was one of many first-hand accounts from civilians who, by the way, their experiences in the Bulge, they're going to pay the price as much or more than anybody to see their homes destroyed, civilians uprooted and killed, and all that. So, this was a very big deal to them and very menacing. Any Luxembourger can tell you two dates, September 10th and 11th, which is very meaningful to them because that's when the Americans came to liberate in 1944. And so 3 months later, when it seems like the tables are going to be turned, you can imagine what that would be be like for Lindenmeyer and so many others like her.
Yeah. Mark, do we get an A on that one?
I'll give you an A. When I was a young man, I lived near Carlo D'Esti, a historian who's passed.
Oh, yeah.
And I asked him this question, and his answer was very similar to yours. So, a lot of people kind of...
Great minds.
Great minds. And I'm going to give you bonus points for the whole Wacht am Rhein changing the name. Like that, because it really makes Hitler look like a nitwit. Okay, next question. All right, this one actually also does, I think, tie into Kasserine, maybe.
Okay, as long as it doesn't tie into the North Platte Canteen.
I'm looking. We're going to find
becoming
something.
experts
Yeah,
on that.
I love the North Platte Canteen.
do.
All right, so this is another Sean, but not Sean from Annandale. I'm not sure where this Sean is from. But he wants to know which German general was the most effective against the Allies, the Western Allies, and why? Wow.
Von Rundstedt would be the first guy I would mention. I don't think it's Rommel. Who were the two Panzer Army leaders in the Bulge? Not Stepp Dietrich. I don't think he was.
Manteuffel.
Yeah, Manteuffel. I would give points to Manteuffel because in the Battle of the Bulge, he kind of defies Hitler's orders and goes up front beforehand and checks everything out. And I think Manteufel's the one that gets the idea of shining the light off the clouds and creating artificial moonlight.
Did not work out too well.
No, but it showed innovation. They switch a lot of guys. Like there was von Kluge, who's trying to contain the breakout in August of '44. He ends up driving his car off into the woods and putting a bullet through his head. God, if it wasn't for the Western Allies, my favorite general on the German side has always been a guy named Hoth, who was a tanker, but he fought mostly on the Russian front.
Let me put this: do you consider France in 1940 part of the Western Allies?
Nah.
No.
If the Americans aren't doing it,
I think that this.
Because then they would take Guderian, I think, would be the most effective in 1940, with his innovations of, having that mobile command center that's, it's basically open air, and the air storches are dropping messages to him.
There's several others, though, too. So what about Kesselring, who, certainly does a reasonable defensive job in Italy? Now, there are some who think he's a little overrated, and I get that. But I do think Kesselring did much for the German cause, such as it was, in being a pretty tough defender in Italy. And by the way, we forget this, toward the very end of the war, too.
He's also kind of instrumental in North Africa because he's able to pull off some logistical miracles. And when you read the discussions between him and Rommel and the Italian, commanders, you just see Rommel so burned out and Kesselring, with a million ideas, how do we defeat these guys? And so it was very active. And what's to me impressive is he's not even an army general, he's an Air Force, Luftwaffe, air marshal, and is able to just extract blood on the battlefield from the Western Allies. That's actually a really good call, John, because, he's very effective. And then by the time he gets to 1945, when he gets moved to that sort of Western Front command, he just doesn't have anything to fight with, and he knows he's screwed, it's once the Rhine River gets crossed. In fact, like the day, 2 or 3 days after he takes command, who visits him? Albert Speer comes to visit him at his headquarters, and a fighter squadron just figured out where he is, and they drop bombs on his headquarters, and a chandelier kind of hits him in the arm, and it's like he's under fire from the minute he takes command.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got no problem with Kesselring.
Yeah, Kesselring's solid, and another guy I'd mentioned too, being near to your heart, is Gare von Schweppenberg, who is an armor officer, and I think one of their better ones on the Western Front. Who's so he's in command, like a corps level command in Normandy, and he is an ardent opponent of Rommel's defend at the beaches concept, which everybody knows that I think Rommel was 100% wrong.
Right.
So Schweppenberg is kind of an ally of Rundstedt in that sense, but at a much lower level. He sees eventually during the Normandy campaign a lot of his headquarters wiped out due to Allied air. He's a pretty stalwart kind of figure, and I think a pretty solid commander. Certainly their A team tended to go to the Eastern Front by necessity. Yeah. But at the same time, of course, they were led reasonably well on the Western
There's
Front.
another good German commander that just isn't able to perform because he's just overwhelmed by the Allied strategy, weapons, tactics. Paul Hauser, I think his name was, who takes over command of the 7th Army. And when 6th Armored and 4th Armored break south at Coutal, his whole headquarters gets isolated. They got to go run across a road between American tanks. And Hauser, up to that point, was an excellent commander, but it's all irrelevant when you're been caught by the tail almost by the Allies. Cobra was such an overwhelming operation that really punched a non-returnable hole in the German lines.
Yeah, and then you have Bittrick, who is the main SS Corps commander in Market Garden. Who's also pretty solid too on a lot of levels. And Modell was his boss. And
Modell, that's an easy one too. He was a great defensive fighter. Yeah. He could always kind of pull a rabbit out of the hat, no matter what theater he's in. He does it a million times over on the Russian front, and then does it again on the American and the British front. So, all right, I think we definitely got an A+ on that. I don't even.
I'll give you, yeah. Kessler.
The fact that we were able to rattle off so many German commanders when at first I'm going.
I guess when you're talking about it, what I was thinking, there's that cliche where they say amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. And that's what you're saying, right? That Kesselring was a brilliant logistician who kept things going when there was not much going. And all these other guys, Modell, Schweppenberg, they're all tactical geniuses, but can only have limited effect because you only have a handful of tanks against the entire Allied force.
What are you going to do?
Yeah. So Kesselring, professional. I'm with you on that.
I'm mad at you, John, for getting that answer before me.
Just have to study more.
Damn you, man!
All right, let's change it up a little here for the last question.
Let's go 3 for 3, John. Come on, I got a good feeling right here.
So Terry says, lighthearted question. My childhood introduction to World War II was through 2 movies. The Incredible Mr. Limpet with Don Knotts, awesome, and 1941 with John Belushi, which was based on a real event. As World War II historians, is there a World War II movie that really spoke to you in your formative years?
There's the movie Patton, but I never really saw that.
I'll tell you, I'm just going to jump in because when I was a kid, like 12, 13, there was a local TV station that once a month on Sunday morning would play To Hell and Back, the Audie Murphy story, and I would not miss it. I could quote that whole movie. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So the movie I can quote is Dirty Dozen. I used to watch that after school all the time. Lee Marvin, attacking that castle with Charles Bronson, and who was the football player? Jim Brown. And I think we've talked about the movie before because I remember talking like, why did he need to throw grenades down there when they poured all the gas? But no, I love that movie, and very little basis in reality, but very much of Army culture. The airborne commander hating his guts, but they have to go train and everything like that. Very anti-hero 1960s kind of movie, and I didn't even realize it when I was a kid watching it. It was funny, I never really saw Kelly's Heroes till I was a little bit older, but Dirty Dozen, that was a big one.
Yeah,
John?
definitely.
Let me guess,
I would
Operation
say-
Petticoat.
Well, it was, fun for what it was. I mean, there's no doubt. And the TV
The
show.
Pink
right?
Submarine.
Remember the TV show? Yeah, I mean, of
Oh,
course,
yeah.
but,
Randolph
yeah.
Mantooth came in on second season. I believe the submarine was commanded by Gomez Addams from the Addams family.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Exactly. So, but I would say Midway. You guys might remember when that movie came out with the
Oh,
surround
really?
sound. Well, I'm talking about as a kid,
Right.
going to see very much. I look at it now, and I think it's a bit of a ridiculous film on some levels. But yeah, I mean, it had the surround sound and all that. But the one, I think the one that really, along with To Hell and Back, to Mark's point, I riveted that too whenever it was on TV. But we weren't able to see it in the theater. It was before our time. But the Big Red One. I remember seeing that. I went with a buddy of mine. His father took us, and I don't think he knew what he was getting into. This sort of protracted World War II tale. But for my buddy and me, we're really into that, and it was just, we were fascinated, and I've always been fascinated with that division, and obviously the infantry. I already was then, but I would say ever since.
John, two things. One with Midway, I think we need to explain Sense Around to anybody younger than us, and that is they basically brought giant speakers into the theater and just blasted you with noise. And I think the movie Roller Coaster was one of them. Like anything that was action adventure, they would, incense around and basically damage your hearing for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
And then another thing, there's something I always remember, and I always check it out whenever I can. TV show. I barely remember any of the plots, but I love the opening of Rat Patrol with those jeeps going over the dunes and the guys with the 30 cals on the back and everything. And I think it was like the same plot every time. The German armor guy who looks like Rommel's trying to corner them again, and something blows up, and they get away. But so that was my candy as a kid, just watching the opening credits of Rat Patrol.
Exactly. What could be cooler than that for a kid?
There you go.
Yeah, I know.
Bringing it back to Kasserine Pass.
There you go. Nicely done.
Yeah. So, John, let me ask. Well, we got an A on that one. Obviously, we were 3 for 3.
We always do. Straight A's.
Yeah. So, I got to ask you, John, what you been up to? What have you been writing? What have you been
Speaking
doing?
of that, I'm glad you brought up Kelly's Heroes because, like you, I hadn't seen it since I was probably like a kid, and
Right.
so I was on a plane trip sometime recently, like a long trip, international trip, something like that, and I thought, oh, there's Kelly's Heroes, and watch that. So it was really interesting to watch from this point of view, like the leadership dynamic.
Yep.
I mean, of Kelly and Telly Savalas, that character, he plays this grizzled NCO tank commander, and his company commander is just kind of, he's this amiable dude, but he's just kind of out to lunch. He's just doing his own thing.
Got a boat or something, and he wants to sail his boat. That's his priority. Now, the best leadership example, I think, is Donald Sutherland in that movie.
Oddball.
Why do you got to come at me with these negative waves, John?
The Moriarty negative ways. There's such an interesting character in retrospect. I mean, that character is not going to be into Hell and Back. You know what I mean? In a 50s movie, it has to be, the 60s and 70s.
He's definitely not going to be in the movie Patton.
No, definitely not. And Patton wouldn't stand for him long. He's countercultural kind of character, and you're like, how could did that really even exist then? And it, probably didn't, but still, but Oddball's courageous too, and he is a leader in his own way, and so is Telly Savalas' character too. Even though he's constantly mocking his men and putting them down. But Sarge, we have to. But Sarge, we have to. I mean, you'd be like, oh, dealing with this guy would be exhausting. You're afraid to say anything. But it was just so interesting. And then Clint Eastwood, of course, plays Kelly. And the whole, if you've never seen the movie, the whole idea is a gold heist, and it's basically a caper movie dressed up in World War II uniforms.
In the summer of '44 during the breakout.
Yeah, exactly. And what was interesting to me, looking back on it now, that I never noticed as a kid, is they come from the 35th Infantry Division, which is composed of the Missouri National Guard, which is, of course, my state. So I found that really interesting. And of course,
Missouri and Kansas.
And Kansas. We don't like to recognize Kansas, but yes, and Kansas.
Hey, I used to drive onto Leavenworth all the time, and I would see that big 35th Infantry, symbol there on the other side of the Missouri River.
Yeah, it's the other side of the river. Yeah, but it's so I thought it was interesting from that standpoint, and then the complaints about carrying the heavy equipment. Don Rickles' character carrying the machine gun. All that's just so true to life on some level. So anyway, I don't want to digress too much. You wondered about what came to mind. That was it.
Yeah.
Whatcha?
There we go. Well, John, I'm glad you asked. I've been up to a bunch of stuff, but the one I think is kind of cool. I interviewed the family of a Marine that was being laid to rest, and he was a captain. His last name was Dillard, and the son mailed me a whole stack of papers, and in that were some green pages with handwriting. And I said, this was written on Guadalcanal. This document was actually written on Guadalcanal, and so that was kind of exciting to have that. And then at the funeral, he hands me this piece of paper that his father had typed up, and it was to a fellow Marine. He was with a heavy weapons company. They came ashore, one of the first waves at Guadalcanal. And, for all the intense fighting of Guadalcanal, it was not a contested beach. The Marines kind of came ashore, set up, and the fighting would come later. But he makes it to Henderson Field, the famous airstrip, by the second day, and he's with an Australian officer. This is all it is, typed up little thing. An Australian flag had flown above Guadalcanal. The Japanese took it down, put up a Japanese flag, and then he goes there with this Australian officer and a sergeant, and the sergeant's been carrying American flag around forever, and they put it up the flagpole, and it's only like a couple of feet long. It's a very small American flag, but he says, but boy, did it look good. And so I contacted the Marine Corps Museum and said, hey, I've got this information about the flags. Do you have the flags? And they said, yes, actually, the American flag was given by a different officer, but this guy Dillard gave us 2 Japanese flags and an Australian flag. And so I scanned and sent them the document, and they said, oh my God, we didn't realize this Japanese flag was on Guadalcanal that he sent us. We know that the cuneiforms, we roughly read them, and they said Solomon Islands. But now we realize that this flag was on Guadalcanal. So it felt good to be able to help the Marines out and to learn a story I'd never heard before and I couldn't find in any book. And so those are kind of those gems of history that really make what we do worthwhile.
Yeah.
Gee whiz, John.
We are lucky dudes. That is really cool. Yeah, because it's another piece to learn about, and it only adds to that understanding and personalizes the history too, which is what it's all about. Yeah.
All right, John.
Stuff. Well, I think we've covered a lot, and we will in future episodes too. And of course, we hope to hear from people. If you want to send a question for Stump the Chumps, we highly encourage you to do this. It's so much fun to take your questions. The good thing is I know the answers and I can carry Kevin, so that's always what's good. But
okay, yeah.
You can send you can send questions to worldwar2live@gmail.com. Again, that's worldwar2live@gmail.com, and 2 is the numeral 2. The numeral 2. So worldwar2live@gmail.com. So thanks one and all for joining us tonight. It's been a lot of fun as always, and Roger out.